Hi everybody, this is BritJet's PSX tips on the Aerowings 747 desktop simulation. Today I'm going to talk about cold weather operations, and to do that we're going to take the aircraft to Zurich where it's snowing and the temperature is below freezing. The airport runways and taxiways are clear. All we've got to worry about is the aircraft. We've got the passengers on, and now we're going to talk about spraying the aircraft. De-icing to get rid of the snow or contamination, and anti-icing to protect you for a period of time afterwards. The spraying process can be one or two staged. Today they're going to do it in one go with hot fluid, and before they start we'd like to make sure the doors are closed so that the passengers don't get sprayed. And there's one or two things we have to configure on the aircraft. If I pull up the overhead panel for a moment, we switch off the air conditioning packs like that, and we also switch off the APU bleed air to stop fluid getting into the air conditioning system. If you can shut down the APU as well because you've got ground power, then even better. So that's de-icing on the stand, and now they'll start. It'll take 20 to 30 minutes, and at the end of that they'll give you a thing called an anti-icing code, which will have a time on it. Now the time will be the time at which they started, and they'll give you some details about the fluid that they've used. So let's just have a look at those details and how we use them. Get yourself a copy of the holdover times from the internet. I like this one because it's got some colours in it, and I'll tell you what we do. Now the message that the anti-icing crew will give you will be the time and percentage fluid. So what you do, start at the left, go in with the temperature outside, and then you come to the manufacturer's type fluid. It can be anything from 1 to 4. 1 is a de-icer only, and then 2 to 4 are anti-icers. 4 is the best one. It's usually applied hot, and it will be applied in a specific ratio to water depending on what the icing crew think is necessary. So it might be 100, 75 or 50%. Then you move along from there in the appropriate column, and you come out with a couple of times for the appropriate precipitation that you've got there. There's a low time and a high time. The low time is light precipitation and the higher time is moderate. There's no times given for heavy precipitation. You have to make your own judgment on that. In fact, the whole thing is really just guidance. You can do your sums on this and you can still ice up within that time, and in the opposite, of course, you can exceed this holdover time as it's called and still not have any ice. The only way of guaranteeing that you're clear is actually to have a look at the flying surfaces. On a 747 that means walking down the back, leaning over the lady in 34A and saying, "Excuse me madam, would you mind if I bend over you? I want to check for ice deposits." Not a good idea, and you're likely to get quite a frosty reception, but nevertheless that's what you're supposed to do. If you can't establish that you're clear of ice, you can't take off. So that's the holdover table. Now PSX models holdover times very nicely. If you go to the service page, bottom right, there's a big box which says de-ice. So if you press that when your de-icing is completed, and then after that you'll see that there's another box there which talks about the holdover time. You can move the slider like this to the appropriate holdover time you've calculated. It's an egg timer really, and it will continue to reduce, and when it gets to 0 you will start to accumulate airframe ice on the aircraft, which is a very nice touch. While I've got this section up, I just want to go to the models of aircraft that you can actually have here to talk about the type of anti-icing equipment you can have. Now under miscellaneous section you'll see there is a bit here which talks about nacelle and wing anti-ice. I've got mine set up for British Airways. Now it can be auto, it can be manual for both. Up to you what you decide to use, of course. And let me try and explain what happens. If I pull up the overhead panel again, we have a situation here where it's set up for British Airways. Now if I select a different system, like here for example Nacelle Anti-Ice with just the manual option, it will look like that, and Wing Anti-Ice can be changed as well to look like that. So it depends how you want it. Let me explain what goes on. The Nacelle Anti-Ice Auto will switch the icing on in the air only, as required. You don't have to touch it, it's fully automatic. On the ground you have to switch the anti-icing on yourself if you need it, and back to auto when you finish with it. The Wing Anti-Ice, as it's called, is actually a de-icer, and it goes on for a short period of time and then switches off. It's inoperative on the ground, and it only works in the air effectively if you've got the flaps up, otherwise the air will just vent overboard through the leading edge devices. Now engine anti-ice is used any time the temperature is 10 degrees or below with visible moisture in the air. It could be fog, it could be snow of course and all that kind of stuff, but it could also be dew on the grass that your engines are going over as you taxi out. So puddles, anything like this that will suck up water, if it's 10 degrees and below, your engine anti-icing should be on as you taxi out. Right, that's the end of that bit. Now the guys have finished anti-icing the aircraft. It's taken them 20 or 30 minutes, and we are now going to put the air conditioning back on for the passengers, like this. Don't forget to put the bleed back on or you won't be able to start the engines. We're now ready to go through the start procedure, and when all the engines are started, then and only then we switch on the Nacelle Anti-Ice. So I'll say bye bye for now, and I'll come back when that's done. Right, the engines are now started. I'm running through the after start procedures. I've switched the APU off, just reconfiguring the hydraulics now. And the next thing is the Nacelle Anti-Ice goes on like that. You can do it all four at once like that once all the engines are started, and then configure the rest of the aircraft as you need for taxi. Now the one thing that we're not going to do here is actually put the flaps out. The reason is this: when you were anti-ice, the flaps were up, so therefore if you put them out they haven't got any protective covering on them. So we leave them up and taxi out to the end of the runway with the flaps up, and we only put them out when it looks as though we're going to be taking off very shortly. Well, I'm on my way now. As you can see, we actually started all four engines on stand, but you could push back at the same time, and I'll talk to you again as we taxi out. Right guys, we are now taxiing towards the runway, but the bad news is things have been slowed up a little bit here at Zurich, and I've exceeded my holdover time. Ice deposits have built up on the wing, so I'm now going to do remote de-icing. And there's a de-icing pad quite close to runway 28 here at Zurich, and it looks like it's nice and quiet, so I've got first slot. I'm going to taxi on here. While I was taxiing out, no more than 10 knots and only 6 or even 4 knots in turns, because of course things could be rather slippery. Coming on to the de-icing pad, I've started the APU because we're going to have to shut down the engines so that they can de-ice the aircraft. So basically you do a full shutdown here, wait for them to do the de-icing process all over again, and then start up and go to the runway. The advantage of this setup here, of course, is you can get to the runway very quickly, and the idea is if you can do it in 5 minutes, then you do not have to do a pre-flight check. You can just go. So that's why rigs are so close to the end of the runway. Here we are then. I've shut the engines down. The packs are off, ready for the anti-icing. I've switched the nacelle anti-ice off as well, and I've switched the beacon off so that the ground operative knows that he can approach the aircraft. So now they're going to anti-ice or de-ice the aircraft all over again, and from there we're going to start the engines up and shoot off to the runway. Right, well, we're approaching the end of the runway now, and we've just selected the flaps out. There's no delay for departure, So once the flaps are there, we would run through the before takeoff checks and line up on the runway. You'll see incidentally I've gone for full TO power on this one for no particular reason than I'm feeling in an insecure mode today, and as soon as the flaps get to 20 we can ask for the appropriate checklist. That will be run through and then we're ready to line up. So I'll put the strobes on and any lights I require, and we will line the aircraft up on the runway. You think you've finished, don't you? One more thing to come. Let me explain. Just one moment. We're on the runway, we're clear for takeoff. One more thing to do then. If the temperature is 3 degrees C or below on RB211s in these conditions, you have to do a run up. And that's similar. Other engines will have the same thing. On the RB211 you run the engines up to 60 to 65% N1 for 10 seconds like this. I just hold it on the toe brakes, watch the N1s. It goes the same as about 1.2 EPA, which nicely ties in with your stabilized setting. Once that's done, off you go. Just press the normal toga, set the thrust, and you're clear for takeoff. So that's the end of the cold weather operations on the ground. Once you get airborne, of course, reconfigure your nacelle anti-ice, auto if necessary, and you're on your way. If the wing anti-icing comes off during that time, then of course operate the wing anti-icing as I described. That's it for now. I hope you found that useful, and we'll think about that there. Thanks for joining in. Bye for now.